So with that being said, let's begin. The resolution was the United States federal government should reinstitute Glass-Steagall. Pretty simple enough. We'll cover this with a number of overviews so that we have a framework for today's debate. So our first overview is simple enough, that of the definitional analysis. We have defined the United States federal government as Congress, as they will be reenacting this Glass-Steagall Act, and Glass-Steagall Act as that act of 1933, formerly known as the Glass-Steagall Act, and more specifics will be given within that of the plan text. For our second overview, simply that of the criterion. We will be engaging in a policy, so it makes sense that we're going to have a net benefit criteria for today's round, focusing on the United States. That basically means that we can show that there is a better United States with our plan than without it, then we deserve that of an affirmation ballot. With that being said, we move on into the background, discussing the problems right now within the status quo and within really the banking sector as a whole. And what we see is the lack of Glass-Steagall caused two major economic crises in our world. That of the Great Depression in the United States during the 20s and 30s, and of course that of this most recent recession, 2007-2010 recession. A large part of that, as accredited by many economists, including Joseph Stiglitz, who is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, is the repeal of Glass-Steagall, which happened in 1999, formerly under the Graham-Leacey-Billy Act, under the Clinton administration. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but I guess that just adds some more humor for the round. Yeah. With that being said, we see that a lot of this caused casino banking, where these commercial and investment banks would take risky assets. They would invest in one another, and a lot of times this led to a conflict of interest. Most particularly, we saw there was conflicts of interest between different parts of the bank, which created market manipulation. With the large money of commercial and investment banking working together, they could manipulate the market so that they could get more money while the people were to suffer. And it led to things like the stock market crashes of both the Great Depression as well as the most recent one in the 2007 recession. And it created a term known as casino banking, where essentially these banks became gamblers and took risky assets and basically threw them all over the market, and only they benefited. What essentially happened was like a casino gambling. The banks were the one basically profiting from these bad transactions, while the people were there left with less money, their investments being lost, etc., basically leading to this crisis where the poor got poorer, everyone got screwed over except for these banks making billions, if not trillions of dollars. And so it makes sense that we then go on to our plan text, which is as follows. Subpoint A, Congress will be implementing this. Simple enough. Subpoint B is that this will be implemented in the next fiscal year. Subpoint C is that obviously no funding is required for this plan, as I'll make clear. Subpoint D is that the SEC will be in charge of enforcement, as well as any sort of agency involved in that sector. Subpoint E is that we will basically reinstating Glass-Steagall of 1933, which basically, to sum it up, separates investment and commercial banking, meaning that investment banks can't participate in commercial bank activities and vice versa. With that being said, we also see that banks under Glass-Steagall cannot underwrite insurance, thus creating a 3-mile thick wall between investment and commercial banking, which is what the bill was originally designed to do in the first place. Now that I've finished the case, I just ask our opponents if you have any questions regarding the clarification. Nope? Then let's move on. Our first advantage is simple. It creates stability in commercial banking. What we see many times is people use commercial bankings to put their deposit, to put savings, checkings accounts, etc. But these are at risk without Glass-Steagall. What we saw is with this recent economic disaster, as well as that of the Great Depression, is that these banks lent out money to investment corporations, and in turn what happens, a lot of those investments went awry because they were high-risk assets. Yes?
Can you repeat the tagline?
The tagline of Advantage 1 is stability of commercial banking. With that being said, again, like I was mentioning, a lot of average day people put money into savings and what is considered secure accounts into commercial banking, except they're anything but secure without Glass-Steagall, because what happens essentially is that money is then loaned out to investments. Those investments, very much risky, usually fail, meaning the people lose out on money that was supposed to be stable. Meaning someone has a savings account and doesn't get anything returned because that bank took risks and lost that money when they weren't supposed to in the first place. And Glass-Steagall would stop that because it would prevent these commercial banks from loaning out those money to other banks, keeping the money within the system of commercial banks, providing a stability, which in itself is an advantage because it avoids future fallout such as another recession, another depression even, and a loss of funds, meaning that the people will have a net benefit overall because their assets are now more secure than without Glass-Steagall, yielding a net benefit. So that creates the stability of the commercial banking, meaning your savings account is now safe from those banks using conflicts of interest to trade it away. Our second advantage is that it prevents risky activity. Simple enough. Now that banks and the investment sector can't donate money to banks or lend money, etc., and manipulate money in the commercial sector or vice versa, that means we prevent risky activity. It's this risky activity that led to this recession when these investment banks and commercial banks basically did whatever they could with their money. The banks used mortgages, sold those as stock bonds, and then those stocks fell, the mortgages fell, etc., leading to a massive fallout. What this does is prevent a fallout from happening. So by preventing a fallout, we avoid future recessions. We secure it so there's only there's less risky transactions, which means there's going to be overall more steady growth for the country as a whole, and meaning for investors more steady growth other than high risk, high return assets, which basically always lead to risk. With that being said, we also see that banks would be forced to manage risk, which is again, another very important impact, because by managing risk, that means these banks now have to think about what they do, leading to a further loss of bad investments, which in turn leads to a loss of jobs, which hurts the economy because of loss of taxation, again, decreasing the standard of living. So this prevents all of that by saving this money, by preventing this risky activity, which saves jobs, which saves the stock market from crashing, and all these different things. And it's also reactionary, or advantage 3 is it prevents spillover effects, because if something happens, say, for God forbid, in the commercial sector, it does not affect investment banking, and at the same time, if something in the investment banking sector went wrong, it doesn't affect commercial banks. So in that way, Glass-Steagall is both reactive and proactive. Proactive in the sense is my first and second advantages, that it prevents this risky activity from happening in the first place, but also reactive in my third advantage in saying that even if some bad thing were to happen in either sector, they wouldn't affect one another. And that's part of the reason this recession was so bad, is because of all these bad mortgages through these commercial banks, because a lot of that was traded through the stock market and through investment banking. It affected a lot of other areas. So this prevents a spillover, which saves jobs, saves money, and overall leads to a better United States, which is why an affirmation ballot should be in favor at the end of this debate.
All right, judges ready?
Yes.
Opponents ready?
Yes.
Now, to provide a brief outline of that, first I should be going over our case and their case. Now, the original resolution we have here today is that the United States federal government would reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act. Now, we accept all of the terms defined by my opponents, especially the one concerning the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, which will become an important point later. And we also accept, we accept all the definitions and their evaluation of net benefits. Now, first, we must understand what the Glass-Steagall Act really is. When somebody refers to the Glass-Steagall Act, they refer to 4 specific provisions. One, that is, the first provision they refer to is that of Provision 16, which basically says that national banks can still deal in securities transactions. Now, the second provision basically states that we can still be national banks can still be affiliated with the Federal Reserve. Section 21 says that we can still take national banks can still take deposits in business of securities. And Section 32 states that you can't have employees in both the Federal Reserve and the national banks. Now, this is incredibly important for one reason. We must look at the first disadvantage of our case, and that's basically the fact that the Glass-Steagall Act. That was bad. We must look at the first disadvantage of the opponent's side, and that the Glass-Steagall Act causes damage to the securities market. In the status quo, commercial banks can underwrite corporate securities. Now, the link to this is that opponents plan to end this practice. Senator Glass, former sponsor of the bill, said that by having this restriction, it undermined the safety of these loans. Security firms that have these securities underinvest weather the storm. Basically, what we must understand is that in the status quo, commercial banks can still support the securities market, but in my opponent's world, we can't actually have a securities market. A Citigroup is a Tier 1 common ratio and is a Tier 1 capital ratio, making it one of the best capitalized financial institutions in the world. Now, this significantly affects everybody. In fact, Bear Stearns did not have his own loans underwritten, and he failed miserably. So we can see that with the Glass-Steagall Act, the securities market automatically fails. Now, this leads to a huge financial crisis because the securities market is a significant part of our entire economy. And if we do bring back the Glass-Steagall Act, we basically take away all of the money that the banks can give to the securities market, leading to an economic collapse. Now, this is naturally bad because an economic collapse means there will be a loss of jobs in the securities market, and those citizens of the United States that do rely on the securities market for their jobs and for their welfare won't be able to have the same amount of income, and this basically leads the government fail as our duty to provide for the American citizens. Our second disadvantage is titled contradictions. Now, since my opponents specifically advocate for the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 and not the Glass-Steagall Act of 1935, they don't have the same amendments that the 35 version had. Now, what the 1935 version specifically did was that it caused Section 16 and Section 21 to directly contradict themselves. Section 16 basically states that any national bank can basically deposit money. They can actually participate in the securities market. But Section 21 prevents this same deposit from being taken. Now, what the 1935 amendment did was it immediately changed this into so it could allow Section 21 to actually it basically changed Section 21 so all national banks could participate in the securities market. However, this contradiction is still found in our opponent's plan because they're advocating for the same Glass-Steagall Act of 1935. Therefore, this law immediately fails because Section 21 and Section 16 specifically contradict each other. And since this contradiction exists, this law can't actually be taken seriously because we can't have Section 21 and Section 16 coexist because we can't disallow national banks from participating in the securities market, but we can't also allow them from participating in the securities market at the same time. Because of these two disadvantages, my opponents automatically harm the current status quo, automatically harm their own world, because Section 16 and Section 21 being contradictory means this law can't pass in the first place. Now, let's move on to the affirmatives case. The first contention talks about the stability of commercial banking. Sorry, give me a second. The first contention talks about the stability of commercial bank. Where do you find stability of commercial banking? Now, we must first understand that again, 16 and 21 contradict themselves. That we can't actually have any real effect in the security banking and in commercial banking. And as such, since the securities market immediately loses out on money, and the commercial banking actually contradicts with each other, this first contention can't really be weighed at all because again, 16 and 21 contradict each other. The same refutation can be cross-applied to contention 2 because since the Section 16 and Section 21 contradict each other, this contention 2 won't really stand. So the real only contention is contention 3, and that is the fact of preventing spillover. Now, we must understand that spillover causes other parts of the economy to fail. This is, sorry, okay, I'm being really stupid right now. Let's go back for a second. Now, the first contention talks about the stability of commercial banking. Again, this really doesn't apply because 16 and 21 contradict. The second contention, we got the same refutation. So since we must look at the contention 3, and that is about preventing spillover. We must understand that securities are not underwritten, and this leads to a financial crisis. So if we do bring back the entire Glass-Steagall Act, we can still cross-apply our 16 and 21 reputation, but we must also understand that spillover will still happen even with the Glass-Steagall Act, and as such, this contention really has no weight in today's debate. So since basically their entire case is refuted by the fact that the law can't be passed in the first place, because they still go by the same 1933 version, they really have no impacts. They can't really take any of their impacts and cross-apply that from the flow, and as such, my opponents have no impact, so the only real disadvantages that we weigh today are the disadvantages of the negation. And should we state that again? Our first disadvantage concerns the fact that we've harmed the securities market, and this leads directly to the people involved in securities business losing out on jobs, and this directly harms the economy. As such, I'd like to urge a firm vote in negation.
So as a brief roadmap, I'm first going to go over the off case and then return to on case in order. So, yeah. Are the judges ready?
Yeah.
All right. The opponents ready? Yes? Yeah. All right. Let's begin. So their main disadvantage to this is that this causes damage to the securities market. However, we as the affirmative are going to turn this into an advantage as that the commercial and retail bankings will no longer be a part of this market, which we feel is can lead to risky purchases of stocks in this market, whereas iBanking, investment banking, still has the opportunity to be in this marketplace that they're saying is their first disadvantage. So first, to go over the plan again, we're going to reinstate the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, which essentially puts a wall between commercial retail banking and investment banking, meaning that our first main advantage is the stability of the commercial banking, which should outweigh any other argument in this debate. Yes?
Can you please specify exactly how risky investments are prevented? Like which section prohibits risky investments?
All right, to clarify on what I mean by a risky investment, sure, the investment bankers can still make risky investments. However, that money was put there to be invested. The money put in commercial retail banking was not there to be invested. However, without Glass-Steagall, these banks did invest that money. And when those investments were risky and did fail, the money that was eventually there for retail commercial banking purposes was then lost. So now back to the first advantage of the stability of commercial banking. Because people can now, with this Glass-Steagall reinstated, put their money into the commercial banking and know that it's going to stay there and it won't be invested in a risky manner as it was before the Great Depression and before this recent recession. If somebody has $400,000 saved up in the bank and they want to make sure that that money is always there, they're going to be assured that it will not be invested in some risky, quick gain idea. So when they go back, obviously that money is going to be lent out to collect interest, as commercial and retail banking does anyway, so they won't be losing money to inflation, but they'll still be collecting compound interest. However, that money will not be put into risky investments and casino gambling banking, as my partner said. So when we look at the status quo without Glass-Steagall, we look at a main component of what caused this recession we're in that when these banks did take the commercial and retail money that was in the commercial banking and invested it and lost that money in the stock market collapse, when people went to the banks, their money wasn't there. So what we had to do as a government was bail them out and put the money back into these banks for the people who had lost their money. So our second advantage is that it prevents risky activity for the commercial banking system and assures people that when they put their money into a safe bank account, that it's going to be there for them. Our third advantage is the kind of safety net that this creates by having no spillover effect, in that if, one, the investment banking sector fails, the commercial banking sector is still there with the money that was put there. And vice versa, if the commercial banking section falls, then the investment banking can still stay strong. So ultimately, when we look at this, we're seeing that people without Glass-Steagall put their money into commercial banks. However, these were not the commercial banks that they might thought they had been. So they put their money in and expected that at any point they could come back and take that money back out. However, the banks put that money into a risky investment and lost it. They tried to make a quick gain, and for a long time they did. However, this kind of policy for these banks only leads to the Great Depression and the recession, as we have seen. And as a government, who do we protect most? Do we protect these investment banks, or do we protect the people and their money that they have? And as much as Citizens United may have you believe, these banks are not people. So we cannot protect the banks over the people. So with this plan reinstituting the Glass-Steagall Act, we are promoting net benefits because of the safety that it ensures in the future of banking. In that, one, we reinstitute the wall between commercial banking and investment banking. When this wall was demolished before Glass-Steagall was instituted and after it was repealed, we ended up in the Great Depression and the 2008 recession. And to move on even further, their security, their one disadvantage to this plan is that it causes damage in the security market. However, because of this wall, the iBanking sector can still invest in the securities market. So because of this, in that we protect the American people in their banking security. So for that reason, and that reason most of all, you should vote for the government. Thank you.
Everybody ready? Yes. To write a brief off-time roadmap, what I should be going over during today's round is I'll just be basically going over the my case, then I'll go over my opponent's case, and really clear up this debate and show why we won today's debate. And with that, I'll begin my topic. So first, let's look at our first disadvantage, which is that it prevents damages of the security market. Now, the uniqueness was, in the status quo, commercial banks can underwrite corporate securities. Now, my opponents get rid of this destroy this by having this link, through this link. The opponent plan will end the practice of having the commercial banks being capable of underwriting corporate securities. Basically, what this means is that these securities that are placed no longer have any guarantee that they will actually work out, which is what the commercial banks used to do. Now, we must firstly look to the example of Citigroup. Now, this Citigroup was created through a combination of Citibank and the Travelers Group, which then allowed Citibank to underwrite securities, which then allowed Citigroup to weather the storm that other banks failed. Yes.
Are you aware that it is because of the commercial banks underwriting a lot of these securities that a lot of these bad and risky investments were made, thus affecting not only the people and their funds, but also the rest of the economy?
Now, what you must understand, though, however, is the securities that were not underwritten, the companies that held securities that were not underwritten were actually the ones that failed. For example, we must look to Bear Stearns. Now, Bear Stearns provided securities, but they were not underwritten by any corporation, by any commercial banks. Bear Stearns was the one that was worst affected by the financial recession. It's actually the one that kickstarted the financial recession. Now, if we look at this, we can see that the financial recession was not caused by the absence of Glass-Steagall, but by the failure to have Bear Stearns have their loans their loans and securities underwritten by a commercial bank. Therefore, what we must understand that the reason for that financial crash was actually the fact that it was not underwritten and not our opponent's contention. This point was actually the only reputation that they had to this point was that iBanks, the investment bank, can still invest. What we must understand is that this reputation fails for the following reasons. The first reason is the fact that without actual underwriting of the loans, that these securities and loans are underwritten, and which actually lead to another financial crisis. Now, this financial crisis would exist if these loans are not underwritten, because if the loans are not underwritten, we must look to the, as I previously brought up, the fact that Bear Stearns did not have the loans underwritten and failed miserably as a result of the fact that they did not have the loans underwritten. But if you look to the case of Citigroup, which had their securities underwritten by a commercial bank, and you can see that they actually survived the storm and actually are now one of the greatest leading financial institutions in the world. We must understand that by putting the Glass-Steagall Act back into what do we see, that will actually create more financial problems because of the fact that the investment bank's securities and loans are protected. Secondly, what we must understand is that Senator Glass, former sponsor of the bill, understood this as well, and he pointed out that by having this part of the Glass-Steagall bill, you must understand that the safety of these loans are actually undermined. Therefore, if going back over our opponent's entire point of the case is that they have to protect the citizens, we can see that we fail to protect the citizens if we do not have we fail to protect the citizens if we pass the Glass-Steagall reenact the Glass-Steagall Act because of the fact that the safety of these loans are going to be undermined. We must understand that since our opponents are putting forth the 1933 version of it, they're putting forth the version prior to Senator Glass's amendments, which then allowed for this. Understanding this, we must vote in favor of this disadvantage alone. Now let's move on to our next point regarding the solvency press that we made on our opponent's case. Now our opponents completely conceded the solvency press, where he pointed out that section 16 and 21 of the Glass-Steagall bill actually contradicted each other, which would prevent the Glass-Steagall law from actually achieving its desired purpose. And what does this mean? If they lack solvency, that means they cannot solve the harms in the status quo. And since they conceded the fact that 16 and 21 contradict within the 1933 version of the Glass-Steagall bill, we can see that as a result of the solvency press, we must vote in favor of the negation because the affirmative simply cannot solve the harms, and they link into our dissent. So even if you don't believe our dissent, you must vote here on the solvency press because if there are zero impacts on either side, then you must vote negation or presumption. But since we also have proven this dissent to be true, you must vote for the negation. Now let's go over their case and let's go line by line and show you how clearly won today's debate. So now, firstly, the first point was that basically the lack of the Glass-Steagall Act created problem for the commercial banking because they were no longer secure, and people's money that they put in commercial banks were not secure. Now, as been partly pointed out, they could not solve for this because Section 1621 contradict, which did not achieve the purpose of the later Glass-Steagall amendment that occurred. And as a result of this, we can see that our opponents failed to solve for the first contention. But even if you don't buy that, we must understand that through this commercial bank, these banks were still bailed out, and people did not lose any actual money from this. Since that is the impact that people were so scared of losing their money, you can't vote on this impact. Next, we must look to the second contention regarding the fact that this will stop them from engaging in risky activity. However,
So how did 16 and 30 and 35 contradict if it basically said that these commercial banks couldn't do the securities while the investments could?
No, it was 16 and 21. The first one was that commercial banks cannot invest in securities, while the second one said that commercial banks could. Understanding this, you must understand that, let's move on from that. that is stops risky activity. However, when asked how to stop risky activity, they basically said that they actually didn't have an answer. All they said is that the investment bank can do whatever they want, and now commercial banks don't have to foot the bill for it. What we misunderstand is that 1621 being contradictory allows this to actually happen, and commercial banks can now underwrite securities even if the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 was passed. Therefore, what we misunderstand is that their second advantage also fails as a result. And move on to their third advantage regarding the fact that it prevents a spillover effect. But what would happen if we were to pass the Glass-Steagall bill is that actually our economy would fail even worse than if there was a spillover effect. Because what we must understand is that if we didn't have the Glass-Steagall bill, then other parts of the economy would fail, and the commercial bank would, if the investment banks were to fail, commercial banks would be incapable of salvaging them, and you see a massive failure of the economy as a whole as a result of this. Because of the fact that these investment banks would fail and no other part of the economy would be able to protect it, we must understand that this is a major voting issue, and as such, you can turn this argument onto our side. Next, we must understand the fact that the securities that were not underwritten actually led to financial crisis. So basically, our opponents are actually solving for the wrong harms, even though they don't actually solve whatsoever. Therefore, this is another reason for negation as a whole. Because firstly, we have shown that basically they failed to solve. They hit one of the advantages they turned onto our side, and secondly, we have a disadvantage, which shows that basically by reinstating the Glass-Steagall Act, we would be contributing to our own economic failure. Therefore, I strongly urge a vote in the negation. Thank you.
Judges ready? Okay. Alright, so there's two major voting issues I'm going to be going over in today's speech. First, I'll be talking about a solvency press, and then I'll be talking about the solvency or the lack thereof that my opponents have. Now let's move on to the first part. Now, we've already stated in both of our speeches that sections 16 and 21 of the 1933 Glass-Steagall Act directly contradict each other. Now, my opponents in their second constructive speech never actually touched on the solvency press, and therefore, since silence is consent, this is automatically assumed to be true. Now, since it's automatically assumed to be true, my opponents can't suffer any of their harms because if a contradiction exists in a written law, then this law can't actually be interpreted correctly. And since the acts my opponents propose cannot be interpreted correctly, they don't suffer any of their harms. They don't have any real impacts. So automatically, we see zero net benefits in the affirmative's world. So there's really only two directions this debate can take. One is that the judges believe that neither the affirmative or the negation provide any real impacts, and therefore the negation automatically wins, or the negation provides significant impacts that outweigh the opponent's lack of impacts, and the negation automatically wins in this situation as well. So let's move on to the second voters issue, and that is of solvency. Now, we as the negation provided one direct disadvantage. We as the negation provided one direct disadvantage for my opponent's case, and that is the fact that the existence of the Glass-Steagall Act basically damages the security market. We already stated in the status quo, commercial bonds can underwrite corporate securities. This is incredibly important because without the Glass-Steagall Act, we can still ensure that the securities market will be able to survive. However, once we do instigate my opponent's plan, this practice will be directly ended, as my partner has already gone over many times before. These underwriting loans is incredibly important to the securities market, and without these underwriting of loans, the investment banks will directly fail, since no one can actually protect them. Because of the prevention of any real intervention between these two different markets. So my opponents completely misinterpret the fact that the Glass-Steagall Act and the recessions were caused by the lack of underwriting, not by the actual lack of existence of the Glass-Steagall Act. So even if we do bring back the Glass-Steagall Act, we don't solve the direct issue, and that is the fact that recessions are caused by the lack of underwriting, not by the lack of existence of this act. So since this plan basically leads to, as my partner has already stated, to another financial crisis, my opponents, by directly misinterpreting how the economy actually works, lead to another financial crisis because the Glass-Steagall Act doesn't solve for any of their harms, and the 1933 doesn't actually have any impacts in the first place. So we still have the same recessions, we still have the same issues, and my opponents don't actually solve for any of these things, and they provide no net benefit at all. So we can't protect the same citizens that we actually could because these loans can't actually be relied on. As my partner already stated, without the underwriting of loans, we can't trust the loans will actually work, so citizens will have less of an incentive to actually use these loans, and again, the economy directly fails because of this situation. So we already win on the solvency press because again, my opponents have no real plan. They can't have a plan that contradicts itself, and therefore they have no impacts. So we automatically win in this situation as well. But the most important part of today's debate is again the financial crisis that we would have from the securities market failing. My opponents do an inadequate job of refuting this, and we've already fully supported this entire contention. And as such, we automatically win because there's more net negatives associated with my opponent's plan than there are net benefits. And as such, because of these two voting issues, I would affirm vote in the negation. Thank you.
Alright, I'm basically just going to go through the main voting issues and basically clear up a lot of the confusion that I feel like the negation had, and just basically try to explain exactly why we win. Now, our opponents bring a lot about this contrast of 1933 and 1935, but what we see assuredly is that Glass-Steagall obviously was implemented if it was the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. And last time I checked, there hasn't been a single major economic meltdown when Glass-Steagall was in effect. The timetable, 1933 to 1999. The two major ones, the Great Depression happened before it was passed, and the Great Recession happened after it was repealed, which means there was an effect, rather positive, if we prevented this economic disaster from happening. I have a lot to get through, I apologize, from begin with. What we also see is Glass-Steagall was 2 for 2, and the lack of Glass-Steagall was 2 for 2 in basically causing these economic downturns to come up. Now, Judge, if our opponents had a counterplan of implementing the Glass-Steagall of 1935, hey, vote for them. Guess what? They didn't. In effect, they defended the status quo. So as much as they like to point out this contradiction, look what we have. A Glass-Steagall Act that may sure not be that 1935 one versus the status quo. When you weigh the benefits we see preventing all these major economic downturns and risk outweighs the massive risk associated with a lack of Glass-Steagall within the status quo, meaning we do yield a net benefit. So when we go onto the framework of a contradiction, it's obviously not if it was implemented. And sorry, like I said, a lot to get through. And so we also see, in addition, that we went on the parameter throughout this debate that investment banks would be allowed to do these essentially securities exchanges while commercial banks weren't. Here's the brilliance. We did an impact turn on that during my partner's speech, that was rather quick, so you might have not caught it. To expand upon it, here's a 3 sub-point answer to that question. The first is investment banks can still do that. My partner mentioned that, they mentioned that. Here's the beauty of it. Yes, securities are more risky, and the fact that they don't have this bank to bail them out is a good thing, because that means that they have to be smart with what they do. That means they can't do these risky things which affect the money that the people get, and in effect basically means that the clients of these investment banks are going to be yielding more profits. These investment banks are going to be making better decisions, and we avoid the fallout from affecting commercial banks, because if the securities are as risky as they say, then guess who is hurt? The commercial banks who underwrite that, which means impact turn their economic disaster. That means if something happens wrong with securities and there is no Glass-Steagall, since they're advocating for the status quo, they contradict themselves. If Glass-Steagall is not there, that basically means there is no wall between investment and commercial banking. What does that mean? That means investment banks can make risky securities using commercial assets or commercial banks as assets. What does that mean? If these securities fail, these investment banks not only fail, but we also see commercial banks fail. If we lived in our world and lived in God forbid, say those investment banks fail with securities, commercial banks at the very least are not affected. So and the ultimate Judge, you have to listen right now. Look at this weighing impact. In a world where securities fail, our plan prevents that damage from affecting commercial banks. In a world in theirs, the status quo, where securities fail, it affects investment and commercial banks because both are involved. So would you rather have one aspect failed or both? The answer is simple enough. We do create a net benefit because Glass-Steagall prevents that. And like I said, I unfortunately have a lot to get through. So with that being said, we actually turned that around them and showed that securities indeed should be by investment banking and not by commercial, to not only avoid the fallout, but secondarily make sure investment bankers make smart decisions and not the casino gambling that led to this economic disaster and that leads to the poor having their assets taken away, as well as the clients in these investments and commercial banks. And when we go to advantages, that means they hold up. That means we do get this ability to commercial banking, because now those assets of securities aren't underwritten by them, which means now we don't have any bad assets within the commercial banking sector. What does that mean? You have a savings account, you have a checking account, that's safe. No bad assets anymore. That means it's protected, it increases confidence. Again, that leads to an economic upturn and avoids an economic downturn, which happened very really in the Great Depression and in the recession just recently because of a lack of this. Again, our second advantage, preventing risky activity. There we go. Their whole securities thing, impact turn around them. Exactly. We're preventing these investment banks from doing these risky maneuvers, and we make commercial banks not even do it at all, protecting the commercial bank assets, which are in the $1 trillion range, so there will still be profit for them. At the same time, investment banks will now have to be smarter, prevent bad transactions from being made, which not only is proactive, as I mentioned, in preventing these bad transactions to be made in the first place, but again, reactive when we go to our third advantage is preventing spillover. Now, they never once attacked our spillover, which itself is a benefit. So we live in a world where we prevent these bad investments and lead to slow and steady growth, rather than one where both industries are negatively affected and lead to a lot of risk, which leads to the recessions and depressions that we've seen in history. For a culmination of these reasons, we ask for an affirmative ballot.
Thank you for the debate.
All right, thanks.
Thank you for the debate.
Thank you, Judge.
Do you want us to step outside? Or?
Nah, that's fine. Yeah, basically done. I'm ready when you are.
I'm ready.
Okay.
Anyone else?
It's a split decision. I voted for the affirmative. I'll go ahead and go first and say why. First of all, as an overview, I'd like to see more clash and more interaction between each other's arguments. I think that both sides are making arguments and they're not 100% clear to me, which is a little difficult for me to evaluate all the arguments because there's not a great explanation that I really understand coming out. But I think that when you run three advantages and then you have decent impacts to them, you guys run a solvency press on all three of them. It's the same argument that you're going over with this contradiction, and then you run one disadvantage. I just don't think that you have enough clash in between that or interaction. I want to hear why you outweigh their three advantages. I want to hear why your disadvantage is really important, and I want to hear a better explanation as to why the solvency press wins for it. Specifically on the solvency press, I understand that they dropped it, and that was a big deal for me, but then I thought about it, and just because they dropped it isn't a reason for me to believe that it's 100% takeout. And I think that just the fact that it existed for 2 years proves that with the contradiction it can still exist. You need to tell me why that contradiction makes it a law that cannot work. You tell me that it can be misinterpreted or that it will be misinterpreted, but you don't tell me what that means, which way it will be misinterpreted, or give me warrants as to why which way it will be misinterpreted is bad, which is kind of the way you need to go for you to exactly win this argument or flesh it out enough. Does that make sense? Okay. So with that said, I would just like a little bit more explanation for both sides on the economy here, because you guys are making a lot of claims, and it would be nice to have more warrants to back each of your claims, and a better explanation just be more clear upon it. With that said, I think I'm just evaluating beyond that the three advantages, considering that there's no real defense beyond the solvency press. I get to look at those impacts, and then I'm weighing that against the disadvantage, which I don't see a lot of arguments that are compelling from your side towards, but when I'm weighing those impacts out, I see the walls between these things where they give me the warrants of the Great Depression and the economic recession, and how those could be prevented by this. Whether or not that's true, I think those are big enough impacts for me that I'm going with a risk that their impacts are a higher magnitude, and I don't really have any reason to believe that yours are more probable either. So that's my reason for this issue.
All right. So I think in general, it's true that you guys need significantly more explanation, and this is in particular true for rounds that deal with economics. Like economics debates just in general tend to go to people who actually understand stuff rather than are able to read off a lot of taglines from the internet, right? So you have a bunch of terms that you use without really explaining what they mean, like what the hell is a security, like underwriting, commercial, that thing, right? I mean, like, I have a general idea of what it means, and you guys are somewhat lucky with that, but, like, you're going to have a lot of judges who just won't know what that means at all. So you need to, like, explain the meaning behind those words. The same thing for, like, investment commercial banking. Like, why is investment banking more risky, inherently more risky? Like, you say it is, like, why is it? Why is it?
Oh, you want us to answer?
Yeah.
Oh, it's because in commercial, the whole point is to basically protect the assets of the people investing in, whereas investment is just throw investments, try to make as much as possible. They kind of have a little bit different goals.
That's
Like a lot of times corporations will put their funds more into investment banking because they don't have like a lot of risk behind it. And so investment banking, when regulated, the purpose of that money is to be invested. However, in commercial banking, the people don't want to risk their money, so they're putting it in a safe deposit.
okay. Like, they're safe. It's possible to have safe investments. The conceptual reason is that, like, when you have commercial investment, the contract specifies like the specific amounts of return, right? So it says like, you give us that money and we will pay you like a fixed interest rate on that, and that goes both ways, like whether you borrow money from the bank or whether you give money to the bank, right? It has a set thing, right? The investment banking is inherently riskier because rather than specifying a number, it says depending on how that company does, we will pay you more or less. So it's like a stock option, right? So like those types of explanation need to be coming out. Like, I like conceptually understood the idea behind the securities underwriting, but it was like significantly underexplained. The same thing for the contradictions. Like, you're like, so there are two things that contradict me there. Okay, so like either like Alex is right that like either you just make that into a counter plan, and then just have that little piece of offense win you around as is, or I again agree that I don't see it as a complete solvency takeout, right? Because you don't explain to me what it does. You're just like, so that law is not perfectly written, so it's all going to fail. Like, I need more explanation on that. That being said, the way that I ended up evaluating the round was the turn to the third contention, to the spillover, which from the underwriting securities argument. Right? And so here's what they tell me. They tell me that if the commercial banking and investment banking are separated, when the investment banking starts falling, it has like nothing to lead on. That's the way I understood the argument, right? Whereas without Glass-Steagall, if they start failing, they're like, hey, we can just get more money from the commercial sector and like not fail. So it's like an additional insurance. Now you make the completely correct response in the rebuttal, which says that like now that they know that they have this insurance, they will start behaving in even more irresponsible ways, which is like true. And that's why Glass-Steagall should happen. But like, to me at least, you say that it's an extension out of the member's speech, but I don't hear that. Like, I hear member's speech essentially just like restating the AC. And again, like it doesn't make any arguments that I caught, right? So all of the responses that you're making out of the PMR should have been in the member's speech. And if they had been, I would have voted for you. But other than that, I see their securities thing as essentially case turn to all of your arguments. So I don't necessarily like weigh them against each other. I see it as the securities thing turns everything because it says that it makes depression less likely. So they garner the depression impact. And they tell me that like the reason the depression happened isn't because there was too much connection, it's because there was too little, because there was that one bank that didn't have the connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Cool. But yeah, I mean, like, just make your arguments earlier and you would win.
Yeah.
Right.